Hi everyone, thanks for coming to this session called New Symfony Tips and Tricks. I start presenting me, okay, I'm Javier. I work as a Symfony evangelist and trainer at Sensio Labs. And today we'll talk, obviously, about tips, tricks, techniques, but also about new features and about not commonly used options, okay? Obviously focusing on Symfony, but also on all the ecosystem, the user ecosystem for a Symfony developer, right? PHP unit, Doctrine, Twig, whatever. Okay. Before we start, I'd like to say thank you to all the people who share their knowledge. These are some of my co-workers. I'm very lucky because I work with very smart people, but also from the community. I mean, there are a lot of people sharing their knowledge, and everything that you are going to see in this presentation, I learned from these guys. So thank you for all the people who share their knowledge, okay? Well, this will be the main topics of the session, these 9 main topics, but we'll also have a lot of mini tips, like this one. We're going to start with some small tip, which is, take a look at this usual controller code, where you want to get the value of some request parameter, and you obviously use the get method, like everyone else does. The problem is that some people think that this is the only method you can use. Actually, there are a lot of methods, like these 2, which are really useful to get the value of a request parameter as an integer or as a Boolean value, instead of a string, which is the default one. So this is really useful. There are other methods, but to me, they're a bit more exotic. I don't use them very often. But the first 2, they're really useful. Okay. Okay, now, the first main topic, which was Doctrine, okay? I'm going to mention naming strategies, because I see in a lot of projects, a lot of people doing this. Defining the name of the property of the table in the database inside the entity code. I mean, in the entity you have some properties, some entity names, and in your database you have other naming strategy, which underscores usually. And a lot of people are doing this by hand, and it's wasting your time. I mean, there is no need to do that. For instance, in Symfony you have this option, the naming strategy under ORM, and you can put the ID of a service to do that transformation, that mapping, automatically. So this is built in. You don't have to do anything but use that option, okay? And that's it. But you can also, if your application is very complex, advanced, or custom, there is an interface that you can implement, define a service, and use it for generating those names in the database, okay? That mapping between the entity and the database, okay? Okay, the second topic about Doctrine, abstract relationships. It's easier than it sounds, okay? Usually you have a relation between entities well-defined, like this one. You have an invoice, you have user entity, and you have a many-to-one relation, okay? But sometimes you have this. You have an invoice entity, and then it is related, again, many-to-one, but sometimes with a user entity, and some other times with a company entity. I know that some of you may think this application is wrong, you should refactor, you should change the way things work, and okay, that's okay, but what if you have to do this? Is there any solution? What we want is to define an invoice bundle, for instance, inside an invoice entity, and that entity, without changing, obviously without changing anything, not code, not configuration, should work with user entity and company entity, or any other entity, okay? Let's see how this is done. First, you need to define a common interface for the thing that is related with the invoice entity. In this case, we don't call it thing, but subject. Okay, so we define an invoice subject interface. Okay, and then in your different applications, sometimes it will be the user entity, some other times the company entity. You implement that interface. Okay, and then in the invoice entity, the one who defines the relation, you do that. See, instead of user or company or whatever, you define a subject. It's very abstract, I know, but you define a subject and relate it with the interface. And then there is another step, the last one, which is this one. With this option, resolve target entities, you can, at runtime, resolve the target entities of your relationships. Okay, so you can make this invoice entity work with any entity that you want, okay, without changing anything, except this configuration option, obviously. Okay, this one, small but nice. I'm sure that a lot of you use this code, especially this part, okay, to transform an array collection into a normal array with the IDs and all of that, to use it in another query, okay? This is very common. Well, in Doctrine 2.5, this is no longer necessary, because Variadic supports an array collection. You can pass the real array collection obtained from a different query, okay? So this is really nice. Another one, another small but nice one, default table options. Again, don't waste your time defining again and again the same option for your tables, okay? You can define under the deval option if you are using the new Doctrine Bundle 1.6, okay? You can define the charset, the engine, all the common stuff for the database, okay? By the way, that charset, maybe if you haven't seen before, it's a bit strange. This is, in fact, necessary to store the emojis in the database. If you don't have that charset, you cannot store emojis in the contents of the database. So maybe you'll need these default table options, okay? Okay, and the last one, Savepoints. Again, this is something that not many people know that Doctrine supports, okay? This is a normal transaction, okay? Begin, commit, rollback, the usual stuff, okay? But if you pass a string to those methods, you're defining a save point. You can roll back to that exact point, to that exact transaction. Maybe this one doesn't make a lot of sense, but here it makes more sense. You define a global transaction, and inside a lot of small transactions, and you can roll back any of them without rollbacking everything. Okay? Sometimes that could make sense. Okay? Well, the Doctrine Bundle, the latest Doctrine Bundle, has a new option called Use Save Points. By default, it's false. But if you set it to true, Doctrine creates those save points for next transactions automatically. Okay, this is the name that it assigns. Okay, and well, if you like save points, now you can get them for free. I mean, they are automatically. Okay. Okay, let's see a new mini tip for optional things that you usually do in Symfony, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Like adding the action suffix in the controller methods. This one is usually called index action. Well, the action is optional. Only if you use routing annotations, okay? And of course, if you do good controllers, I mean, if you put a lot of methods, you shouldn't use this because everything will be a mess. Okay, but if you only use actions in your controllers, as you should, okay, you can remove the action suffix. It's not mandatory. The same goes for this one. The method parameter of event listeners is optional too. There is no need to do that. Everyone does that on kernel session. There is no need, because Symfony does exactly that. If you don't define the method parameter, Symfony does on, plus, and the camel case name of the event. So no need to do that. Okay? And this one is my favorite. I'm sure that your templates, especially the error pages of your applications, look like this, because that check is needed for Symfony 2.7 and earlier versions. Okay? Because these pages usually are not covered by a firewall, and then an error happens. And okay. In Symfony 2.0, it's not needed, that check. Okay? It won't break the application if the page is not covered by the firewall. Okay, so it's much nicer, the templates, not having to do that app user check. Okay. Okay, the next topic, Composer. This one is going to be brief. Okay. because we are going to only talk about one thing, about improving or trying to improve the performance of class loading, which is the most important thing of Composer. Okay, this impacts a lot in the application performance. Okay, last year we mentioned the autoload dev option and all of that. Okay, but this year we're mentioning a new option, the exclude from class map. Okay, this one allows you to tell Composer which classes shouldn't go to the optimized dump of class loader. When you execute that command, usually on the production server, okay, to create the class map, that creates thousands and thousands of lines of a big array of classes. Okay, with this option, you can say which classes shouldn't go to that loader, which are all the classes that you don't use on the production server, like the test classes, the test-related classes. Okay, and it's cool because that's not a regular expression, but you can use some special characters, so it's really nice. Okay, and Symfony is already using that in all the repositories of Symfony. You can see that. For instance, in this pull request, you can see the details of how do they do that. Okay. Okay, next topic, tweak. We're going to see several small things, like the deprecated filters, okay? As applications evolve, some features are gone, some features are new, and the problem is, how can you deprecate all the old stuff without breaking the application? I mean, imagine the old filter is deprecated and you don't want developers to use it anymore. How can I do that without breaking the application? How can I do that the Symfony way, the professional way of breaking things? Okay. If you use the latest version, the tweak 1.23 version, you can declare tweak filter deprecated, and you can provide an alternative, the new filter that people should use. And whenever a template uses the old filter, you'll get a message in the log, okay, a deprecation log. So it's really nice to not break things and to do it right. Okay. This one, also useful if you are doing very advanced things. Okay, this is for edge cases, no, not for the daily use. Sometimes you may need to check if a block is defined. Otherwise, if you try to use or access a block which is not defined, the application will break. Okay, so you can check that with this new test. If title is block, then use it. Okay. However, it's not merged yet onto it, so it's not a new feature. It's a future feature. Okay, it's for the future. Okay. The next one, Variadic filters. This Variadic thing is getting more and more famous now that PHP 7 is released. Okay, and we're going to learn more and more about this thing. Okay. Look at this filter, at this tweak filter with 3 arguments. Nothing strange here. Okay. The problem is, what if you need to add more and more and more arguments to this filter? Well, for tweak, there is not a problem at all, because on tweak, arguments are named. So you, even if the filter defines 10 arguments, you can define the 3 that you need by their name, and that's it. So tweak template is always going to be great. The problem is the PHP code which is behind this is going to get more and more complicated. Okay? So instead of doing this, adding more and more and more arguments, you can do this. You can say to tweak that this filter is going to accept any number of arguments, unlimited, and all of them are going to be stored in that argument. In this case, I call it options. And then inside the code of the filter, you can access all of them. 2, 3, 100 arguments, doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, this one in tweak 1.22, you can get the source code, the whole source code of any template, because they added this method getSource to the template class. So you can do things like this, which again is very edge case. You don't need this on a daily basis, okay? But you can get the full source code of the template. Okay, and why should I need this thing? For instance, Nicolas, who was the guy who added this method, mentioned this on GitHub. he said, well, maybe we can use it to test if the template is compatible backwards or forwards with some tweak features and things like that. I mean, it's a very advanced case, okay? And just for, because it's a bit surprising, how do they get the source code to the template? If you open the cache directory of Symfony and you see the compiled template, at the bottom of the compiled template is the whole source code of the template commented. I mean, everything is there at the bottom of that class. Okay, so they use reflection and regular expressions and things like that. Okay, but it's right there, the source code. Okay, I hope everyone knows this option. Okay, the delivery address. You can redirect all the emails sent by the application in the development environment to that address. Okay, this is very well known. But this other option is not that well known. You can whitelist, you can exclude some emails from that option and say, hey, if some email matches these regular expressions, send the email. Okay? It doesn't matter that it's the development environment, and okay, those emails are really sent. Okay. Okay, next topic, configuration. And here, obviously, we need to talk about environment variables, which again is more and more and more hot topic in the Symfony and PHP community. Okay, and in fact, Symfony since day one, since Symfony 2.0 in 2011, okay, has supported the environment variables. I mean, you can define this in your Apache configuration, and the database password and all of that will be get from there instead of the parameters YML file. Okay, so this works since day one. Problem is, if you open the compiled container, which is different in the dev environment and prod. Okay, in the dev is an XML, and in prod is a PHP file. If you open them, you'll see two main problems. First, you can see the password, the sensitive information, the sensitive parameters are there, are dumped. And second, it's static. I mean, when you compile the container, Symfony gets the environment variable, and it dumps there. So it's not dynamic. You change the value, the application will break. Okay? So you probably want something like that, something like super dynamic. I mean, whenever I want a parameter, get it from the environment variable. Okay? But this doesn't work. And probably it's not going to work anytime soon. Okay? We tried to do this, but we failed. This is the pull request with a lot of comments and information. And Fabian said, we cannot do that. We cannot resolve that. We cannot get at runtime the value of environment variables. Probably we need to rethink the entire config component. Okay? There are some alternatives, obviously. Stuff, for instance, has released this bundle. It's not the same, okay, but it allows you to get environment variables resolved at runtime. Okay, so it's pretty close to what you want. Okay? And I'm going to tell you some an alternative. I'm obviously not saying that this is better than environment variables, obviously not, but it's another way to solve this, okay, just in case you find it useful. And it starts like that. In the production server, you define a credentials file. For instance, in etc/credentials/example.com YML. And there you put all the sensitive information. I mean, the database, password, the GitHub API, everything that you don't want local developers to know. Okay? And then in your Symfony application, you put that. At the bottom of the import, you import that file. So the local machine, the local developer, won't have that file, but the application won't fail because of the ignore errors option. So the application locally will use the normal parameters YML file, and everything will work. But on the production file, in the production server, that import will override the parameters YML options. So the right ones, the right parameters, the hidden parameters, will be used in the application. And since you are importing them in the regular Symfony config, they will be available everywhere. I mean, in the console commands, for instance, which are a bit tricky to work with environment variables. Okay. Okay. Next topic, Monolog. I still think this is the most underused feature of Symfony. I mean, people access the log files, and that's it. They don't configure anything with Monolog. They don't tweak anything. They don't do anything with Monolog. Most people, no, not all people. Okay? And it's sad because it's really easy to do cool things, like custom channels, for instance. To create a custom channel, you just need to do this. Boom, done. 5 seconds. That's it. That's a channel. For instance, marketing or security or clients or transactions or whatever is cool for your application. And then you can log in that channel like that. And then you'll see the message in the default log file, but you can process those files and those logs differently, or you can save in a different file, or you can do whatever you want. Okay, but is that easy? That's easy. Okay. And in the latest version, you can even use container parameters for the channel name. So, well, minor but nice addition. And this one, custom formatters. Last year, we mentioned how to create a processor and things like that. Well, for advanced stuff, it's OK. But for common needs, maybe this is too much. Okay, so probably it's better to do this. You may need to tweak how log lines are generated and saved in the default Symfony log file. Okay, you want to change the default format. To do that, you don't have to do any code, any classes, any methods, nothing. You need these lines of configuration. Nothing more, nothing less. And then you create a service based on the line formatter from Monolog, and then you pass 3 arguments. The first one is which format should the log lines have. Obviously, you can use a lot of placeholders for the datetime, channel, message, whatever. The second argument is the format of the datetime placeholder if you use it. In this case, we are removing the date, day, month, and year, and we're only letting the hour, minute, and second. Okay? And if you look closely here, you'll see some new lines, which usually are wrong, but in this case may help us understand better the log file. And that's why this third argument is important, because by default it's true, and that means ignore those new lines. Okay? So if you set it to false, you only need to do this, add that formatter option, and you are done. You don't have to do anything else. And you'll have this. On the left, on the right, you see the default Symfony log, which is like that. And here, you see the tweak log format. A few lines of code, of configuration. You see each line is separated with a new line. We don't care about the month, day, and year. It's ridiculous for a log file. For this log file, the local log file, we put new lines. I think it's better to read it, to understand. Okay? Okay, Monolog plugins. There is no plugins, no real plugins in Monolog. They are packages, okay? And Jordi maintains a list of formatters, handlers, and things like that for Monolog. There are a lot. I'm only going to mention one, which is this one, to show the log messages in color. I mean, it uses ANSI escape sequence, and if you have a console compatible with that, you'll see all the notice, warning, things like that, the critical ones, in color, okay, which is really nice. If you don't have an editor capable of understanding that, you'll see this, okay? So it's pretty awful. Okay. The new toolbar. Okay, a lot of people are liking it, okay? But I don't really care that much about the new style, the new visual style. Probably it's more modern and all of that, but what I like about this new toolbar is that when a panel doesn't contain any information, it's not displayed. So by default, the toolbar is the first one, and when you have more and more information, you see more panels. But by default, you have a lot of space for your own panels, for your own things, okay? So things you can do with the toolbar. For instance, you can reorder the panels. I don't recommend you to do that, but in case you need it, you only need to tweak the priority of the data collectors. For instance, here, we put the security at first and the request panel at the end. Well, maybe you need the security panel at first, I don't know. These are the priorities of the built-in panels, okay? And if you look closely, you see that there is a gap in the priority numbers, okay? They are not consecutive. Why? Because we want you to be able to insert your own panels in the middle of the built-in panels. Okay, so if you define a data collector, a custom data collector, and you don't set the priority, you'll see it at the end. Okay, but if you tweak with the numbers that I showed you earlier, you can move the panel whenever you want. Okay, and put it in the middle of the built-in panels, which is pretty cool, probably, if your application has a very important panel. Okay. Okay, and more things that you can do is to remove the panels. It's not very easy, it's not very convenient, okay, but you can do it like that. You redefine the panel, the data collector service, and you remove all the arguments for the tag. The data collector tag doesn't have any argument, and this makes to remove the panels. For instance, if you don't like the translation panel because you manage translation in any other way, you can remove it entirely from the web debug toolbar. Okay, security. I'm only going to mention one thing, and it's a very, very old thing. In fact, this is from 2011. Why I'm going to mention? Because a lot of people don't use or even don't know this because they are not documented. In the Symfony documentation, you can't find this. A lot of people are doing these kind of things, listening to the interactive login event, to do advanced stuff when the user logins, like register the date, the last login date, or validate the user according to their security role, or advanced stuff. Okay? This is not bad, but this should be done with an access success handler. Okay? So you only have to do this: create a class, login handler, for instance, and implement that interface with that long name: authentication success handler interface. Okay, you implement that, you return a response instance, and that's it. You configure your new service as a success handler, and when the user logins successfully, Symfony will execute your own class. And you can do any database query to do things, or validate the user according to some complex logic, or whatever you want. But it's a real class, a normal class, it's nothing strange, nothing hacky. Okay? And this success handler is executed after the event interactive login. Okay? And the same for the failure handler. Okay? Okay, test. I'm going to mention only 2 or 3 quick things, like this one: data providers. Maybe, probably, you're defining your data providers like that. You return an array of arrays. Okay? It's okay, it's perfect. The problem is when an error happens. Okay? You see this kind of misleading or hard to understand error message. Okay? If you do that, the error message is much, much meaningful. Okay? And you can go directly to the error. Okay? This one, generating data providers. Probably, again, you are doing this. Okay, it's perfect. It's like we always did. Okay? But you can also do that. If you use a modern PHP, you can yield the data generators, okay? To reduce the memory consumption, for instance. Okay? It doesn't improve the performance, but the memory consumption, yes. Okay? More things. Again, the setup and teardown methods. A lot of people still do this. The setup method is the one who gets executed before each and every test of that class. Okay. And you there do some initialization things and all stuff. Okay. This, for instance, is what we do in the Symfony installer. Okay. Well, and the same for the other ones. Okay. PHP unit also defines this annotation, the before, which allows you to mark a method for being executed before each and every test of that class. And you can have any number of before methods, not only the one setup, any number, so you can do small and meaningful methods. Okay? obviously the order matters. The first one is executed first. Okay? And the same goes for the other ones, the tearDown and the setup before class, everything. There are annotations. So probably you should start using them. Okay? And this one, this is like a quick win because it's a 10-second change and it can help you. Okay? If this is your PHP unit configuration, you may consider updating for this one. See, it's only adding 4 or 5 options. And this makes PHP unit make a lot of additional checks to see if your tests are risky in some way. Okay? So it's like for free. You have better tests. Okay? Okay, this one. The PHP unit breach. Probably you are using it, you have installed it in your applications, you run your test, and you see that deprecation message. Okay, cool. Problem is that when a deprecation occurs, you see this message at the end, okay? But sometimes you need probably need the full stack trace of the error to see exactly what's happening, where, and all of that. And you don't have the stack trace here. Well, in the latest version of the PHP unit breach, you have a stack trace on demand. If you execute your test like that, what will happen is, if the index method of the blog class triggers a deprecation, test will stop, and you'll see the full stack trace to see the origin of that deprecation. So you can put there any regular expression, but a cool trick would be to use this. If you put that, it means everything, obviously. So whenever a deprecation occurs, test will stop, you see the full stack trace, you can fix it, run again, and again, if there is a deprecation, test will stop, you see the stack trace, fix it, and again and again. So if you are upgrading some Symfony application to 2.8 or 3, probably you need to run tests like that, okay, to get the full stack trace of the error. Okay, very quick, some comments about services, some quick wins, like the smoke testing for services. Smoke test, I love smoke test because it requires almost zero effort. I mean, it's super easy, and it's an early warning for when things go wrong. Okay, so it's a quick win, actually. And it's like that. You can put that unit test in your applications, those 4 lines, to get all services and try to get them. And when something wrong happens, this test won't pass. So it's an early warning that you have broken some test, some service, some something you have broken. Okay? You probably need this to avoid some errors, but it's like that, 5 lines of code, and that's it. And you forget forever. Okay? And in case you have very important services, you can improve it like this. Not only if they instantiate, but if they instantiate correctly. Meaning that the object that you get from the service implements is an instance of the class that you expect. So for very important services, maybe you can improve this test, this smoke test, like that. Okay? And changing 2 lines, you can do like this. Obviously, this is not a real profiler, but it's an early warning that something wrong went in your application. Some service went very slow somehow. Okay? So you can check, verify that no service takes more than 50 milliseconds to instantiate, for instance. Okay? And by the way, these are the most, the slowest services in the Symfony Standard Edition. Okay, I did some tests, and these are the milliseconds that I got in this same computer. Okay? Cool. The last topic of the talk will be the console component, okay? And we're going to talk only about one thing, okay? Again, this is not documented yet on the Symfony documentation, okay? So you won't find it anywhere. Okay, the main problem, in my opinion, is that most of the Symfony commands are a mess, a total mess, because they mix content and presentation. I mean, your commands should only care about generating content, information, not about outputting visually pleasantly. Okay. So We built a style guide for all the built-in Symfony commands. We've redesigned all the built-in commands, but you can also use this, what I'm going to explain right away, in your own commands. Okay? You only have to do this, and that's it. You can use the Symfony style. It's one line of code. Okay? So we're going to see in practice. For instance, your command wants to display a title, a section title or the main title. Okay? This is very, very common. And I've seen a lot of different ways of doing that. I put it here 3 different ways. Okay? And this is awful, all of them, really. I hate them. Okay? You only want to display a title, and you're writing 3 lines of code. This is so ridiculous. Okay? So I'm going to show you with the Symfony style, the new style for the Symfony commands, how can you display a title. Okay? Are you ready? Yes? Like that. If you want a title, you put the title, and that's it. Symfony cares about the underlining, the new line before and after, changing the color font, everything. Okay? Another example, a table. Again, add rows, add headers, add style, render, boring, whatever. Let's see with the Symfony style, how can you render a table? Again, are you ready? Okay, let's see. That's it. There is a table method. You pass the headers, you pass the rows, and everything gets done. You don't care about the presentation, the styling, the styles, the visual appearance. You only care about the information. So your commands are less and less cluttered with wrong code and wrong things. Okay? So the Symfony style guide provides a lot of useful shortcuts, but for all the common needs, so you can output or ask for input for a lot of different things. Okay? And this way you can easily create beautiful console commands and very consistent. Even if you don't like this style, being consistent is better than not being. Okay? So that was all for today. Thank you. I don't know if we have time for a question, maybe a quick question. Don't forget to rate the talk. Okay. We have a question here. Yes.
Yes, I have a question about your tweak tips.
About?
Your tweak tips about the source code, because you're saying that in your code you're talking about using self, and
I cannot really hear you. I mean,
the tweak tips.
Yes.
And as I know, self is deprecated for security matters.
Which one?
So using of self in the template is deprecated for security.
Using the self on the tweak template.
Yes.
Yes. Previously, in an example, I saw to get the source code of a tweak template, I saw a code which uses the self variable with an underscore self. This won't work for tweak 2.0. Okay, for 1 point whatever, it works, but it's deprecated. You are right. So in tweak 2.0, you can't use this trick. You have to get the template in PHP and use the get source method. Okay, so for tweak 2.0, you can use that. Okay, that's right. Okay, there's other question there. No, there.
Hi.
Hi.
Just information I just wanted to ask from you, that is there any better way to handle the raw filter of tweak?
The raw?
Raw. Raw filter that we use for executing the JavaScripts or any other raw HTML scaping. So if there is any better way to use the raw, because it increases the XSS attacks.
Yes, in Tweak, but it's very advanced. There is a class called markup. Okay, so it's Tweak markup, and if you put there some code, some JavaScript or HTML or CSS or whatever, the code that you put in Twig markup, it gets printed as it is. I mean, it's not escaped, and it's like saying to Twig, I'm already escaped and prepared this content, so don't touch this content. So it's more or less like the raw filter. No, it's not a filter. I mean, if you need something like the raw filter, you have to use the raw filter. But in PHP, not in Twig, you have to use the Twig markup class. You put the content, and if you try to display that Twig markup thing, it will be printed like it is, without any change.
So it's like from the PHP point of view.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and we don't have sadly time for more questions. Okay, thank you.